Coming up with the NBA draft a little over a month away, the Houston Rockets aren't going anywhere, knocking at the door of Brooklyn, trying to give them back their picks for all kinds of control. We break down the value and whether or not Sean Marks and the Nets will ultimately answer the calls, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marbert. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. A phrase that may get used, Doug, when it comes to the Brooklyn Nets and the Houston Rockets. Some terms may apply, but we've now been hearing about Houston, the offers that were made in the past, and now that there's going to be future offers coming as Houston seems to want to get into those 2027, 2029 Phoenix picks when it comes to the NBA draft.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is a story that's probably not going to go away, at least through the draft, you would think. Evan Sidery from Forbes and also from Sporting News, super locked in, especially around kind of some of this stuff and some breaking news stuff around the NBA. Reported again this morning, Wednesday morning, that the Rockets would look to engage with the Nets again this year to try to sort of, I'll just read it to you. It says Rockets will re-engage the Nets before the draft about trading back their picks in favor of the Suns' future selections. And that was coming from Kelly Iko as well. So I don't know, man, like this is interesting because it's going to reopen this discussion of sort of about like what tact the Nets should take going forward, like what should be their path, whether these playoffs have changed their possible formulation of what they thought the path was. Like it had to have a little bit, you would think. And just like sort of like, landscape of the league. But I don't know, man. I'm very interested to see how this goes. I think we've been resolute that you have to like seriously consider these things, but this is a little bit different than the picks back for Mikal thing. Like this represents a slightly different scenario, which we can definitely discuss.
Yeah, I think at a high level, this is the version of, I mentioned 27 and 29, because that's when you think the Phoenix picks are going to be at their highest value. If you're the Brooklyn Nets right now, the short term of having control of your own assets. I think what's interesting to me about it is if the Brooklyn Nets were open to this idea, basically meaning like we want to have more control of our own future sooner. And even in the Phoenix situation, you're still talking about if Phoenix is not a high caliber team in 27 and 29. It's easy to project that now, but that's 4 or 5 years away. By the time you get to 29, like who knows what's going to happen by then? They may go out and get another star. So having control of your own assets is good. The tricky part for me is I'll start with this, that if the Nets did this, wouldn't the logical next step be to then trade Mikal Bridges and trade some of the veteran guys? So on paper, hey, we want to have control sooner. This could make sense. And whatever the parameters of this ultimate deal would look like going towards the draft. Only if the Nets then say that's because we're willing to, as you mentioned, the landscape of the playoffs is different now. It's going to be competitive. We're probably not going to be able to get into the conference finals, even in the East, for a couple of years here. We should be resetting now. We've talked about this in different iterations all across the offseason. If you're not going to be willing to move Mikal, to move Cameron Johnson, to move these veteran players, then I would say you're never going to take the offer from Houston, because you're always talking about competing now, quote unquote, and then using those draft picks later on down the road to continue to build.
Yeah, that's the question. It's you keep the Suns picks because you want to trade them for someone else. You get your own picks back because you're going to use them yourself. I mean, that's really just like the A and B kind of choices. Like those are it. The Nets don't seem like they have any intention of using these Suns picks. And so therefore we really actually shouldn't even look at them as future Nets picks. These are assets out the door to bring in a player. I would never even think about the Nets choosing to use these picks in the future because it doesn't seem like there's any intention to actually see them all the way through.
And isn't that the problem here? Because if you're the Brooklyn Nets, you're saying, well, yes, we'll trade away someone else's picks that we don't have direct control over in terms of
Yeah.
what their team is going to do. Hey, we'll give those up to get Donovan Mitchell, get player XYZ. But once you trade for your own picks back, well, now we're going to give up our, now we have our own pick control, but we also traded the Phoenix picks to get a player. All of those things end up creating weird log jams. We're having control of your own picks, but now being more competitive through other moves that you make. It's
They
just a
wouldn't though. They
hodgepodge.
wouldn't
It
though
always ends
because
up being a hodgepodge for Brooklyn of
these
like,
are the
what are
no
we
because
doing?
these are to me it's actually very clear. To me, I see two very clear paths. These are the two definitive paths.
Yes.
And I think that there's one that they're going to definitely walk down, and the one they probably aren't seriously considering, but I think they should. So the first one is current path, keep the Suns picks. What's done is done with Houston. Have Mikal, Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas, see what you can get, see what those guys plus a Claxton re-signing gets you on the open market between the picks and then next year's free agency, and rebuild around that. And you and the Suns picks are out the door to get a player in. Okay. That's path one. That's definitive to me. Path two, one that I think they should seriously consider, but they probably are not. Their picks back, right? Their picks back, like swap Suns for their picks back, control their own draft. Mikal traded for another package from someone else's, picks and non-controlled, maybe a young player in there. Now you have your own picks, which you can tank through. So another team kind of maybe bank on that not working out in the future with Mikal.
Sure.
Strip it down to the studs and go for like a 3 to 4 year timeline where you get some guy, like maybe a generational guy in the 2025 draft, plus considerable draft assets going forward because you have them from like the other player, like specifically Bridges that you traded. To me, I see those as two very clear. They're completely polar opposites. And I don't think the Nets are going to consider the latter because it's just too much of an upheaval. But it has to be at least enticing. I mean, that is a huge reset in a way that like you could really set up yourself to be great for 10 years, but you could also stink for 10 years. It's hard. This is a hard kind of puzzle to wade through.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I will also, coming up here in just one moment, tell you path number 3, where they not only trade back for their own pick control, but also keep Mikal Bridges. And it's all centered around that 3rd overall pick in the 2024 draft. We'll get into that coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Gametime. Look, if you're into buying tickets, maybe it's for the sporting event, maybe it's for the concert, maybe it's for the comedy show, it's the theater, you got to head on over to Gametime. If you're looking to go to a game, you want the experience to be fun. You don't want it to be a hassle. You don't want it to be expensive. You want to get the best deal out there. You want to know exactly what you're going to see when you sit down. You want it to be fast, easy, and this is what the Gametime app gives you. Right now, if you go over to Gametime, there's all kinds of different great stuff. They got Yankees tickets on there. Ed Sheeran coming to Barclays.
Yes.
That's actually tonight. You're gonna want to hurry. You're gonna want to hurry on that one. You got NHL playoffs down here. A little pricey, but it's the playoffs, baby. It's the Rangers. That's what happens when you make the playoffs. It's all there for you on Gametime. They got last minute deals. You can save up to 60% when you buy those last minute deals, flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing. You're gonna see what you're gonna see with those seat views. Download the Gametime app. Create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
All right, so as we roll along in the Locked On Nets episode, talking about what is a narrative that will just refuse to quit. Houston wants to give the picks back to Brooklyn. Brooklyn doesn't want to give up the Phoenix picks. They all have all these different iterations. But as I mentioned there, what I find curious, and when you listen to fans, you listen to pundits, oh, it's a weak draft class. Fans say, who cares? You could give me the number 1 overall pick, and I still wouldn't want it for Brooklyn. But because the pick ended up falling 3rd, I think that's the other reason why maybe you get this report that Houston is going to call Brooklyn again and say, well, now it's number 3 overall. And whether or not we think that you look inside of this draft class and believe that, you can talk about is Topic, is he going to be the guy, right? These players don't mean a ton to us on paper right now, as they usually don't in any draft class, unless you're one of the elite number 1 guys. But does Brooklyn look at it and say, oh, well, now we can do one of two things. Because you mentioned about if it's taking the picks back control, then let's go ahead and trade Mikal for another package. And by the way, the version of that is now we have someone else's pick control like we did with Phoenix, and we wait to see how the next few years play out for them. But if you believe in one of these top prospects and you believe they can come in and be an immediate contributor to this roster, there is the version of it where you get your own control back and you maybe are plugging in a starter that you otherwise are not getting, short of trading away draft assets. Do you think that plays into Brooklyn at all? Knowing that Sean Marks said, I want to get back into this draft at some point. We think it's going to be a Dorian Finney-Smith trade. Okay. But at some point, these prospects have to stop being treated like effectively the spit platoon in a saloon. Like,
Yeah, of course.
they are NBA level players to whatever degree. One of these guys, a couple of these guys are going to break out coming out top 10. It happens every year, regardless of draft class.
Yeah, look, I think most people would agree that the draft doesn't have a lot of top end talent, and it has talent, right? Like, I think there's just like there's a sort of a resetting around it. Like, if you spike the number one pick, it kind of sucks to have that be the year you do it.
Sure.
And like, if you had the 10th pick, like, you're probably in fine shape, right? Like, because I think the draft smooths, it seems by all accounts, the draft smooths out pretty quickly. I just don't think they're going to look. The question is, I don't think they're going to do it because I don't think Mark sees it that way. And I think that they've held on to these Suns picks. I think that the Suns picks for them, along with Bridges, represent this like anti-KD thing that it was like, hey, look what we got for this. It has to mean something. I think we've seen this with Bridges. I think we've seen it with the. I think we're seeing it with the Suns picks, which, by the way, are valuable. So I'm not taking away. They're valuable with a question mark, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I think there's like crypto. It's like, I think there's value down here. Could go to zero. You know,
could totally bottom out at any moment. But like, could be value.
Could go to zero. Could go to zero. Could have incredible upside. Like, I think there's a wild range on like the outcomes with the Suns picks. I think people want to see it as a foregone conclusion that they're going to get like back what the Nets have given away in these trades. I pump the brakes on that just because life is long and there's lots of time to do lots of different things and you just don't know what's going to happen. But I do wonder, the way I always try to think about this, and this is not fair because there's other considerations here, but I try to think, if another GM with no pressure on them stepped into this situation right now and said, do what you think is right, like no ties to the past, nothing else, do what you think is right in this moment, what would all the GMs do?
Yeah,
I firmly believe the GMs would take this deal and like reset this team. I'm making it up. I'm putting myself into fictional GM land here, but to me, it just seems so obvious. The problem is there's other things. You traded KD, you got to sell out Barclays, you got an owner who wants to make money. Like, there's other stuff here. So I get that part. I just think from a X's and O's standpoint, the way the league has kind of shifted here, it's going to be real tough to be real good for a while.
Yeah, with
the way the Nets are currently set up. Like, I just think it's just going to be hard. It's not getting easier. There's been a shift in the NBA, and it's all gotten younger.
And that's the thing too. I wonder about time in all of this, because you're right. We talked about it in the moment when we looked back and said, oh, there could have been pass-through opportunities for the Brooklyn Nets with Mikal Bridges, with Cameron Johnson, even with Dorian Finney-Smith. It's not even at the highest level. It's some of these secondary pieces at the time that they traded Kyrie, the time they traded Kevin Durant, and then likewise in the summer. And every time they don't make a move or decision like that, we're left to logically assume they're never going to do it. But if the sample size on not making those decisions keeps giving quote unquote negative returns, i.e. missing the playoffs, missing the play-in tournament, not being a very good team, if those keep coming, then I think at some point, and you've already heard fans talk about it this way, we've talked about it this way, at some point I think front offices can turn around and say, we that represented a certain value, but guess what? It's 3 years later, and it just doesn't matter as much anymore. It's 2 years later. It just doesn't matter the way it once did. And a great example of this would be looking at Green for Houston, Jalen Green for Houston. Well, 10 months ago, you would have said, oh, I don't know. Is that the right value? Whatever. Then he has the season he has, and then you revisit it. You say, oh, well, all of a sudden that player represents something different in a potential trade package that would involve Mikal Bridges, talking away from the picks now a little bit, right? So it's okay not okay. It's the right thing to be informed by what you see from the landscape of the NBA currently, talent that maybe is starting to rise up that you didn't anticipate, and reevaluating. I agree with you. We have to assume they're not going to do it because Sean Marks and the Nets have almost shown a hard-headedness and blindness to the changing landscape around them at times. But ultimately, they did this with the superstars, Kevin Durant and Kyrie. They didn't want to give that up. They didn't want to let them walk. They didn't want to give up James Harden. But in the end, they pulled the trigger on all these things because they saw the writing on the wall. This is a far lower ceiling, but the writing is getting onto the wall now about what Mikal Bridges, Cameron Johnson, and this version of the team is going to look like. And the ultimate question becomes, do they still think that, but with Donovan Mitchell, but with player X, Y, or Z, we could turn this thing around, right? That's
I
the
do
ultimate
wonder.
question.
I do wonder actually how much this stuff in Cleveland here is changing the way they think too, because like now look, Mitchell hasn't he could just definitively say like he could resign the extension and then we just know, right?
Yep.
And I wonder like if things like that would push them toward different moves, right? Because maybe you thought Mitchell was a foregone conclusion and then he resigns, or like
Yep.
the market for him is way bigger than we thought, right? Miami Lakers, like and that's the best package, but like maybe it's going to be tough, right? Maybe it's going to end up being a crazy overpay. I wonder how much of this stuff like does inform a little bit about where they would go. And I would say too, I know people want to like look at like this current NBA and be like, okay, well, the East was a train wreck this year and it still would be hard to get past Boston. Like it's hard to imagine like those like this kind of these dominoes fall the same way in another year where like every guy gets hurt except for Boston, basically is what happens. And they lost Staps and they're still going to be, and they're even without Kristaps Porzingis, they're almost for sure better than any team the Nets could theoretically put together for next year to go into the playoffs, I think, right? Or and maybe the year after is different. Like, so I think that if we're just looking at this situation, when you combine that with what's happening out west, where every guy that's basically still around here is super young and probably just going to be on the team for a while, right? And way better than most players the Nets could probably get here. Like, I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Like, I just think you have to seriously think about these and this thing. And by the way, this doesn't even involve Bridges. Like before it was just, Bridges for the picks.
Yeah.
Now it's like two mystery picks for the picks back that you control. Like that to me is honestly even better. Like it's even better.
No, it's excellent from from the Nets perspective. We don't want to give up Mikal. You don't have to, right? Like that's the difference here. Okay, hey, we're taking the thing that you say you 100% do not want to do. You give every indication. Great. Here's still a version of it.
Like what a hedge. So a hedge against, especially this season. Like what an incredible hedge to have the 2025 pick swap back. Like just have it be your own on a team that's like that's gonna probably be bad again. Like that might alone be close to it. Like that might alone be close to worth it if you think the 2025 draft is this good, right?
Yeah.
Like what an incredible hedge on the original mistake. There's a chance that the Nets 25 pick is better than than both of the Suns picks. Like there's a good chance that if this team, they just gave away the number 3 pick in the draft and the team's going to look almost the same, I bet. Right. So what are the expectations here?
And that's why coming up here in a second, let's paint the perfect picture of allowing the landscape and allowing time to allow Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets to do the perfect version of this offseason draft and next year. We'll get into that, plus how the Pacers kind of blew it, all coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, let you know this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, we all carry around different stressors in our life, big or small. You just heard me getting worked up here a second ago, and this is just about the Nets draft picks. I mean, imagine the other things when we get into actual real life stuff, how important it is to get things off your chest. This is where BetterHelp can step in. If you benefited from therapy in the past, you know that this is what you need to do. This is the way the world is going. We got big things on our mind, small things on our mind. Sometimes those things can just end up building up. You want to be able to let it go. This is where you want to give BetterHelp a try. They're going to match you with a licensed therapist. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible. It's totally suited to your schedule. You just fill out that questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist. That doesn't work. It's all right. You switch it anytime, totally for free. BetterHelp wants to work with you and for you. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we wrap up the Locked On Nets episode, thanking each and every one of you for being a part of it on YouTube and on the podcast feed, of course. We're going to talk about, at least even just briefly, what a tragedy it was in the Eastern Conference Finals as the Pacers seemingly snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Nope. Flip that
Nope.
around. We'll get it right on the back
There
end.
you go.
Now, ultimately, we'll clean that up in post. It's not a big deal. There's only 2 teams and only 2 versions of that sentence, but I managed to find the wrong one. Now, the thing I wanted to bring up here was, so first, because don't worry, guys, when we're talking trades and machines, I'm going to get there on a wacky one and get a little third team involved here. But the perfect version for Brooklyn, if I want to say, okay, be informed by the landscape, make this trade with Houston, do the pick swap, get control back, go into the next season, upcoming here in 2024, be bad, because we think the Nets are probably going to be bad. And if the team is bad leading to the deadline, pull the trigger on Mikal Bridges, pull the trigger on Cameron Johnson. And to your point, 2025, we're not just going to be like bad. We'll be in the lottery. Maybe we spike lucky like it happened this year, but we didn't have control of it. No, we're going to go ahead and triple down on making sure that 2025 in a deep draft class, we're as locked into a top 4, top 3 pick as humanly possible. Clear off those picks and get other teams' future assets, reset it in a way where you get multiple young pieces in, you have your young core, you get some other Phoenix team's version of, 2028, 29, 2030 future firsts, and then build forward from there. And I think one more season, one more half year of the Mikal Bridges centric team not being so good, that'll allow the front office to say, of course we love Mikal, of course we identify him as being the core piece of this, but we're not good. And we're not going to be good going forward. And we're not go get the player X or Y away from making this happen.
Right. This is what I mean. Like, they're just not good. Like, they're just not that good. And I get they have some role players, but like, it's not like these role players in expanded roles, like defied expectations, right? Like sort of like that, the version of the Nets before that had a bunch of role players basically on their team and defied expectations with D'Lo and Karras and Jarrett. Like that group was, because you know how we know they're a bunch of role players? Because that's what they basically are now.
Right.
Right.
That's what a bunch of role players.
They basically are. They're good. They're really good. But they were basically high-end role players that exceeded expectations and everyone went nuts. This team had a bunch of role players and they stunk. Yeah. Right. And they totally stunk and they gave away the 3rd pick. And like, there's just not a lot of avenues to get better. Whereas, like, if you're the Rockets and you're like, hey, look, we got Şengün, we got Amen, like, we got Jalen Green, we got a bunch of Tari, we got a bunch of young guys, we got Fred VanVleet, maybe he comes back. Like, we have some real building blocks here. We take the Suns picks and go grab a superstar. Like, that makes a lot more sense based on the sort of who they have around them. Now, maybe you're saying, okay, Nets guys are better. I don't really see it, but whatever. Mm-hmm. So, it just makes so much more sense. I don't know. Maybe we just skin this thing, more ways than we should. But to me, they're not going to do it, which is like, TLDR here. Then Sean Marks is probably hanging up. but it just is like one of those things that just seems. Okay, let me put it this way.
Here we go.
I don't even think this is quick. I actually, even if you didn't think it's a snap call, like, this is just such the easiest call in the whole world. Even if you didn't think that, I think that the Nets probably aren't even thinking about it for long enough. And that to me is probably the problem. It's like, I hope they're at least seriously considering it. Maybe it's a closer decision. I don't even think they're going to seriously consider it. And I think that to me is my worry about sort of the organization going forward.
We've used this phrase before on the show, talking about opinions that we've had and things that we think are going to happen. They look different events unfold, and we get reinformed. We recalibrate. Intellectual dishonesty, right? It's intellectually dishonest if you are the Brooklyn Nets and you sit there and the way that you think about a potential trade for picks, Mikal Bridges, for anything. If you sit there and say, nope, like we got him for Kevin Durant trade. Nope, like we got those picks. They're going to be valuable down the road. If you continue to maintain that same perspective, then it's just intellectually dishonest because you're not allowing new information to inform you. And I'm sure that they are thinking about different versions of it, but for all intents and purposes, it feels like the Brooklyn Nets in their front office is thinking about, what do we turn the Phoenix picks into? What is the player that we go get? What does 2025 offseason look like? Who are the free agents? And by the way, that can go away where you get a player for those Phoenix picks and you have money next offseason when Ben Simmons comes off the books and you go sign another player. The difference here is, as we always say, that's also predicated on, we have another episode coming up we're going to do about this, all the other teams that are going to be looking to get players in 2025 free agency. It's not just, Nets get to go out and pick and choose their best produce from the market. Other people are shopping. So that's the part of it that we always come back to about having your own control. Now, Doug, if I could, is there any version of this, though? I like to. I have fun. We're over on the trade machines. Would you do a version of this, whether it's, and this isn't about what the Nets do it. I'm just asking, would you sign off on this if you were the GM for the Brooklyn Nets? Whether it's all in one shot or over the course of this offseason and then ahead of the deadline. But there is a version of this. When you look over at Cleveland, they want to keep Mitchell. Well, what about the idea of Mikal Bridges ending up in Cleveland, probably the elite player that you want to put, if you still believe in his value, with Donovan Mitchell in that roster? We know they don't want Darius Garland. We know that Houston wants to get these pick controls. Would you sign off on a version of a deal where the Nets don't get all of their pick control back, but they end up with Darius Garland and Jalen Green on this roster, sending out Mikal Bridges, sending out Dorian Finney-Smith, and Houston ends up with control of future assets, maybe Jared Allen from Cleveland, because it looks like his time is coming to an end there too?
No, that's an easy one for me. I don't do that. I don't want to do that. I really don't want the Nets to do anything that doesn't involve them getting their picks back.
They're going to get they'll get picks back, but they won't say Houston holds on to. Houston ends up retaining the
I
only want to do this down the road.
I'm only shipping these guys out if I know I can control the draft a little bit. If I can control the draft odds is the only way. That's the only way I even come close. I can definitively say that. I do not want them to just trade away these guys and get worse when we're still relying completely on someone else being worse. So that's it. Let's do 30 seconds on Pacers Celtics here before we get out of here.
Don't forget to get in the comments though here, because people love these trade machines. Doug has a hard time with it, but you know me, man, I'm in the weeds on it. Yes, the Boston Celtics and Pacers did kick off the Eastern Conference Finals. Boy, somebody told me that the Pacers were the fluke this season, and that's why it doesn't matter the Nets didn't make it. Well, guess what? They're in the Eastern Conference Finals. Guess what? They trailed by double digits throughout this game, and they kept coming back over and over again. And then seemingly, man, inexperience, just the late game jitters got to them in that final 60 seconds of regulation, ends up costing them what would have been an epic Game 1 steal on the road against Boston.
They played as bad of a final minute of regulation that you could ever play. I mean, it's like unbelievable. The list, this isn't even the whole thing. And this is not in total order. Halliburton dribbles the ball off his legs. On just like dribbling it up off the court. He takes a crazy sidestep three with like 12 or 14 seconds left on the shot clock when they're winning, which makes no sense. They can't inbound the ball. They don't call a timeout to advance it. Carlisle took a little heat for that, but whatever. They don't call a timeout to advance the ball. Then can't inbound the ball. Don't have a challenge left, although they would have lost. I think because Siakam was standing out of bounds as he touched the ball, so I don't think it would have mattered either way, unless you're really challenging that he got fouled or something. And then to not foul Jaylen Brown off of what admittedly was a good inbound play, because it was like they don't even take a dribble, and they did a good job breaking this down on the broadcast, where it's like usually on the dribble is where you get the foul to make sure you're not getting him in the act. But still, to like not foul and to allow him to basically take I know Siakam's right there, but these guys, that's uncontested. Like he doesn't even have a hand up in Jaylen Brown, and for him to knock it down, I just don't even know how you can. It's like that's not even the whole list. They blew it so many ways. I don't know. It was a bummer. I really wanted them to win, but
of course, it
ended up being like they just made so many mistakes.
Boston has lost like game twos this postseason at home so far. Do you think that, like, because everyone was like, hey, that was your chance. You didn't get that game 1 win. It's all over for you now. And listen, Boston's at least talent wise, they're the better team. They're the more experienced team. That cliche thing of it, they said to Carlisle, what do you tell your players? Well, you play good enough to beat them. I mean, he acknowledged, like, we made a ton of mistakes. Like, we made a ton of mistakes in this game. Do you think that the Pacers can come back and do this again in game 2? Because the biggest factor here is that Boston lives and dies by the 3. And if you play at this pace, the Pacers can score with everybody, against anybody, can make you run. Like, that's one of the big narratives. Is like Pacers have been able to play their style of game throughout the entire playoffs, regardless of matchup. If they can keep doing it, like, I don't think this is a foregone. Well, thanks so much for trying, Indiana. It's all over. They should be buoyed by the fact that they can go deep in this series with Boston.
I think they should have won, and I think that it's a bummer they didn't. But I think that they can I don't think they're going to win the series, but I think that as long as Stapps isn't back, they can definitely hang. I mean, there's other things that could go. I mean, it's not like the Pacers shot the lights out. They shot 37% from 3. Boston shot 33%. So it wasn't like they got crazy like shooting variance and still lost. Like they basically shot the same. They just shot fewer. I mean, Boston took 30 free throws. Pacers took 10. Again, that's some of that. Well, I don't think they were getting screwed. Like Pacers just don't attack the rim tons. And so
No. Yeah.
I don't think that like that was like some kind of screw job, but that
There's
could
a size
definitely
deterrent for them not to try to do that against Boston.
Yeah, that could. I got a thing in the background here, a landscaper here. Awesome. So I think that like that could probably even out. I think they can just definitely hang with this team if it's going to be an up and down thing. Like if they're going to keep playing crazy, get Horford run out of the gym. Like there's a world where that happens. Like I think Indiana can hang, and these guys are professionals. I think there's hangover effects from this stuff, but not as much as people want to believe.
Yeah,
like I think that like they can. I think if anything, they saw, hey, we should have won that game. We can hang with this team.
Yes.
That's the other way to think about this. We can hang with this team. We should have won. Let's go out and win game 2. Like, I think there's definitely a world where that exists. Like, Nesmith doesn't foul out. Like, there's other things that could have happened here that I think that you can tell yourself a really nice story for the Pacers against Boston.
Shout out to Miles Turner. Fantastic game for him. I mean, he's been excellent for them. And then even TJ McConnell in this game, I was shocked because he is not a large, he's not a big player. They have a lot of big guards. They can kind of make it a problem for him. Listen, the little end around down the baseline going towards the basket isn't always going to work against Boston, but he was able to be productive as well on both ends of the floor.
Siakam was awesome. Like Siakam was, I thought, the Pacers' best player. Like, oh my God, like it made the whole trade was worth it. Like, he was so good. Anyway, we got to get out of here. All right, so we're gonna come back. We'll talk a little bit more. We'll talk Dallas and Minnesota here on the next day. We'll talk a little Mikal Bridges and this Knicks thing that keeps coming up that we'll try to pour a little cold water on that one as well. In the meantime, make sure you're subscribed over at Locked On Nets over on YouTube.
Even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. Why that is William Rogers.
One of the all-time great poets. We're back in tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.